What makes a wide receiver one in fantasy football? We set out to answer this question, courtesy of our guy Wes. Shout out Wes on our research team who put together the characteristics of a wide receiver one. And from this data, we can actually identify candidates that are going to potentially jump up this year into the wide receiver one category for the first time in their career. And we're going to talk about guys that maybe could do that, but probably won't. So let's go ahead and look at the answer of what makes a wide receiver one. We break this up into 3 categories here: an alpha wide receiver one, a plus wide receiver one, and a low wide receiver one. Now, the main thing we're looking at here on this graphic is the targets per game, about 10 per game for an alpha wide receiver one, about 9 targets per game for a plus wide receiver one, and about 8 targets per game for a low wide receiver one. Catchable targets per game are important as well, and we'll get into that here in a minute. Team target share, 28%, 24%, 23% respectively. Receptions per game, 7, 6, and 5. So it just kind of tapers down as you get into the wide receiver one statistics and you get into low and wide receiver ones. But the yak is in between 4 and 5 for all of these guys. The touchdowns per game is anywhere from 1/2 to 0.7 touchdowns per game. And so when you look at the aggregate of all of these tiers, what makes a wide receiver one? The general answer is a guy who gets about 9 targets per game with about 6.5 catchable targets per game. He scores around 250 total fantasy points in a season. He has about 9.2 air yards per route. And also the weighted success rate, which weighted success rate means...
This is the focus.
This is the focus here. This is the focus. When you look at reception perception, which is done by Matt Harmon, it's amazing stuff. If you haven't, go check out his website. We use a lot of data from his on our videos because he really is good at putting this stuff together, putting together what you see with your eyes and quantifying it, right? And this is really centered around route running and success in route running metrics. You have success rate against man, success rate against zone, success rate against double, success rate against press. The weighted success rate is something that Wes came up with, and basically it is the total success that a player had against man and zone, because these are the two these are the 2 leading factors in determining wide receiver ones and trying to identify wide receiver one candidates. And so the weighted success rate percentage for a wide receiver one on average is around 78%, with tiers of 80, 77, and 75%, the median being at about 78. And so with that being said, and centered around that weighted success percentage, what I did was last year, of all the players that have gotten a reception perception grade so far, what I did was I went in, and you can put this on the screen now, I went in and pulled all of this data. I marked of these guys in this tier of between really 75 and 80%. 80, really the highest here I think was like 80.92% weighted success rate. And this is again route running metrics. I pulled all of these guys. I marked where they finished last year. Of course, 12 of these guys, or really 11 of these guys, were wide receiver ones last year, and they all fell within this range. But there were a fair amount of guys in this range that weren't wide receiver ones. And then I went to the other statistics that we had here, the targets per game, which we said was going to be about 9, right? And then the touchdowns per game, which we said was going to be about 1/2 a touchdown to about 0.7 touchdowns per game. And I was like, okay, the guys who didn't finish as wide receiver ones, who had the highest weighted success rate, why weren't they wide receiver ones, and can they be wide receiver ones this year? And those are the guys this video is about. And I'll start with the first one. The highest weighted success rate, when you're looking at guys that were not a wide receiver one last year, the highest weighted success rate of guys that weren't a wide receiver one was Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson had an 80.11% weighted success rate against zone and man coverage. He was a wide receiver 3 last year. And this is a guy, when you filter just the guys, that weren't wide receiver ones that fit some of these categories, he had the highest amount of targets per game as well, because he had almost 10 targets per game, 9.88, meaning he was getting the targets that he needed to. He was running routes well enough to be a wide receiver one. And where, again, usually in one of these statistics, you can find why he wasn't a wide receiver 1, or even really a wide receiver 2 in this perspective. And there are 2 things here for him. The catchable targets weren't there, so bad quarterback play, and the touchdowns weren't there, which again is just an overall bad offense and bad scheme. And so Garrett Wilson, as somebody who leads this list in targets, in my opinion, is the prime candidate, which he's being drafted accordingly. So this is no surprise. This is just putting data behind what we've believed all along, right? Garrett Wilson statistically is a prime candidate to be a wide receiver 1 this year because he gets the targets necessary. He runs routes at a clip that is efficient enough to be a wide receiver 1. And the one statistic holding him back, or the 2 statistics, are going to be fixed by better QB play. And the other one is the most volatile statistic in fantasy football, and that's touchdowns. So when you see Garrett Wilson do that this year, I think that he has a better than average chance to be a wide receiver 1 this year. And I think the data shows that this is going to be somebody who could make a really big jump this year. But when you're talking about weighted success percentage. And again, we filtered all of these guys. And then we filtered them by targets. And the guy with the next amount of targets here actually was Michael Pittman.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting to look at with Michael Pittman because he is incredibly unpopular right now in fantasy football, really across fantasy spaces all over the place because they think he has limited upside. I mean, he was a high-end wide receiver too last year and had 160 targets. And I think when you're looking at his weighted success rate and the targets per game and the fact that he's not touchdown dependent, 0.25 touchdowns per game, like this is something that is absolutely sustainable. I don't care who tells you otherwise. I don't care if there's a rushing quarterback at the helm. I don't care if there's a dude that can't run at the helm, Matt Ryan, that can't get out of the pocket or do anything even in the pocket. I don't care if it's Gardner Minshew, who's short and has an incredibly limited ceiling. Michael Pittman will consistently get his own. I mean, you've seen it across his career. 129 targets, 141 targets, 156 targets last year in 2023. Not only has it been sustainable, it's gone up and up and up to a point where he is flirting with wide receiver 1 numbers. Do I think he can make the jump this year? Absolutely. Against very popular opinion. Very popular opinion. He is the security blanket for a rushing quarterback who admittedly has passing game deficiencies. Passing game deficiencies meaning consistently accurately throwing the ball, which is not generally a struggle 5 to 10 yards downfield, right? It's taking shots downfield. Michael Pittman is in that range of like, it's easy to get him the ball. When you're looking at wide receivers who can make that wide receiver 1 jump, right? We always talk about this. The best wide receivers in the NFL, the ones that produce at a top 12 level, are the ones that are the best talents, and the ones that are the best route runners have the best overall ability. And when you're looking at Michael Pittman's total route wins last year, he was 4th in the league. Total route wins. He's one of the better route runners in the league, one of the most successful route runners in the league. His route win rate, you're like, okay, well, he's on the field all the time. Okay, well, what about his route win rate? It was still 15th in the league, 53.5%. I mean, that's up there. That's one of the better wide receivers in the league. He's incredibly underrated. We're not saying this just because we're Colts fans. We're trying to be realistic with the volume. And even if his volume goes down a little bit because of the rushing upside of Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor being back healthy, okay, he loses 20 targets. He's still getting 140 targets. I think these next 2 guys that we're going to talk about too should really be talked about in the same conversation because they look so similar in terms of opportunity and weighted success. And success rate.
I do want to touch real quick because this is really interesting, and this kind of points to why we've been so high on this person. The second highest receiver to have a weighted success rate above 80% or higher, and not be a wide receiver 1. There were only 2 of them. It was Garrett Wilson, and the second one was Josh Downs. And Josh Downs, on his reception perception profile, grades out as a very, very elite route runner. Like, he is very good.
Guys, I promise we are not just pulling these predictions out of our butts. We're not just saying that Michael Pittman is going to be good because we think he's going to be good and we like him. We're not just saying that Josh Downs has the ability to be a productive wide receiver as a wide receiver 2 in his own offense just because we like him. Like, there's a reason that we're saying this, and this weighted success rate proves it.
And with Downs, this proves that point. Because with Downs, I'm not saying he can make the wide receiver 1 jump. Obviously,
correct.
I don't think he can.
No.
I do think he can make the wide receiver 2 jump.
Yes.
And I think that is his ceiling, but you saw really the 2 factors that were holding him back, and the reason that he graded so high in weighted success but so low in production was because A, he was getting 5.7 targets per game. That's not near enough targets, and I don't really see that going up. And B, only 0.12 touchdowns per game. He really wasn't scoring touchdowns last year. I don't really see those 2 things changing. If he scores somehow 2 or 3 more touchdowns, then you can easily see him jump up there. And if he gets even 1 more target per game, you can see him jump up to the low end wide receiver 2 range. That's his ceiling. But I do kind of want to point that out because he is so good and people don't realize it. He really is a very good wide receiver. But with that being said, I don't think he's a guy that can make the next jump. So let's talk about the next guys on this list. And again, sorting by targets per game here, so the guys who are most likely to make that jump. Let's talk about Chris Olave first. Actually, I'm going to let you talk about Olave. I want to talk about Ridley because Ridley is the one I looked into the most of this list. And we've been touting Calvin Ridley as maybe the best pick in fantasy football drafts this year, the entire offseason.
I think it's incredibly ironic that both of these guys, as much as we talk about them and compare them and say, pass up on Olave at price and go take Ridley 3 rounds later, and then you just see it right here, they're going back to back.
Yeah.
Like they both have pretty much equal amounts of upside to be wide receiver 1s producing in 2024.
And this proves the point that Nathan has been making all offseason. And with Calvin Ridley, he is a guy that 76.5% weighted success rate, which when you're looking looking again at those tiers, it puts him somewhere between the plus wide receiver 1 and the low wide receiver 1, which again, at Calvin Ridley, at this point in his career, you would expect him to fall somewhere in that range. But when you're looking at the other metrics, 8 targets a game, 0.47 touchdowns per game. Both of those metrics were dang near good enough to be, and when you're looking at the low end wide receiver 1, 8 targets per game, right? And then the touchdowns per game was 0.5. He was hitting those metrics. And when you're looking at these 3 specific predictive metrics, he was hitting everything. And so the question becomes, why was he not a wide receiver 1 last year? And I think you find it pretty easily when you go and look at his advanced metrics and you look at his target quality rating, 63rd in the league. His catchable target rate last year was 82nd in the league. 64% of his targets were catchable. That is atrocious. It is so bad. It's so bad. And all of the efficiency metrics that talk about the quality of targets, the quality of QB play he had last year. I mean, as much as we like Trevor Lawrence was not good for Calvin Ridley last year. That, in conjunction with Calvin Ridley, was not being used last year correctly by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this is a guy that I think, as you see him get more involved in the Titans offense, we think he's going to be the wide receiver 1. From an analytics perspective, if he had even an average catchable target rate, he probably would have been a high-end wide receiver 2 last year.
Mm-hmm. And people really, really like to talk about the drops with Calvin Ridley, and I'm just here to tell you, drops do not predict what a wide receiver can or cannot do from a production perspective in fantasy football. You just saw Puka Nacua lead the NFL in drops last year and be the wide receiver 4 overall as a rookie. Calvin Ridley, 6th in the league in drops with 6 total drops.
That's 6 points.
And
that's 3 points in a half PPR league.
Exactly. And the only reason it got so much publicity is because one of them was an automatic touchdown. It was like it was a bomb down the field from Lawrence. He threw it into his hands and he just dropped it. Yeah. And then 2 other ones were like in the red zone, end zone targets where he was like in the back of the end zone and he just dropped it. Half of them had to do with touchdowns. That's the only reason that he got so much crap for it. The only reason. If they were anywhere else on the field, we wouldn't even be talking about that as a concern for Calvin Ridley. We wouldn't be. The fact of the matter is, he didn't get 76 or 75 receptions at the end of the day because he dropped so many balls. He only dropped 6. He had a ridiculous amount of targets last year. Amount. I think he had more than 75 receptions. I think I'm underestimating.
Again,
it wasn't very many.
8 targets per game over, I think, 16 games. So, I mean, he had quite a few.
It was a lot less receptions that you would have expected from the amount of targets that he got.
136 targets on 76 receptions.
Oh my gosh, I was right. Yeah, okay. So that's so bad. That is so bad.
It's really poor. But talk about Chris Olave and talk about him transparently, because Chris Olave graded out way higher on all these metrics.
Oh yeah, super high.
The success rate is very high.
Absolutely. And to me, we talk about Chris Olave pretty consistently in a negative light, and I don't want to do that in this video because at the end of the day, there's a reason he's going in the second round.
Yes.
And this proves your point. All of you Olave truthers, this proves your point. Dang near an 80% weighted success rate as a route runner and 8.6 targets per game, and he's not touchdown dependent. A third of a touchdown a game. So we're not depending on the touchdowns. We're not depending on big playability because of his targets and his consistent ability to win routes. He is a top-notch wide receiver. He's one of the better wide receivers in the league. And now he's in an offense where he is really the only guy left. Rashid Shaheed, he's the deep threat, right? And anyone else there, like it's Chris Olave and that's it. The biggest concern that we have with Chris Olave in 2024 is him playing with Derek Carr. Honestly, I view it in a very similar light as the situation in New York last year with Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson got 170 targets and he still couldn't crack wide receiver 1 numbers. That's abysmal. Derek Carr isn't as abysmal as those quarterbacks playing for the Jets last year, but he's like bottom half of the league. And he really, really struggles to push the ball downfield. So downfield, yeah, I said that right. But with Chris Olave, I think if anything, this definitely proves that he has an incredibly high floor. I view him very similar to Michael Pittman heading into 2024, where when you draft him, I don't think he's going to lose you a league because he's going to get so many targets and opportunity there. The question just is, where is it going to be? Where is that opportunity going to be? Is Alvin Kamara and those running backs going to really take a lot of that opportunity in the red zone? And is he going to have minimal touchdown production? Or is he going to be able to be super versatile across the field and get targets between the 20s and also get a bunch of red zone targets as well. That just is yet to be seen because we haven't seen it from him, admittedly, in the last couple of years since he came into the league. So we're hoping for a big jump from Chris Olave. I'm rooting for him, but we're just being a little bit cautious with his outlook this year. But again, admittedly, he absolutely has the upside to be a wide receiver 1 this year. And if he ended up cracking top 12 numbers at the wide receiver position, I would not be shocked.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith, I kind of want to lump together here because these are guys that had a 78 and 0.8% weighted success rate.
Very different style of wide receiver.
They are, but they both got around 7 to 7.5 targets per game. And while Jalen Waddle had 0.29 touchdowns per game, Devonta Smith was a little bit higher. I think Jalen Waddle is a lot more likely than Devonta Smith to have a wide receiver 1 season this year, if I had to guess. Why? Because again, Jalen Waddle is proving that he can produce the way he did and be a lot less touchdown dependent than Devonta Smith. Not to mention he does grade out with a higher weighted success rate from his route running, does get more targets per game, and I think there will be more targets per game available for Waddle this year, and more touchdowns available, especially in the Dolphins offense where you had 30 plus running back touchdowns last year. So both of these guys technically hit these thresholds. Again, I'm riding more with Waddle than Devonta Smith, but another guy that a lot of people are drafting based on his potential and based on the fact that he hasn't really done it yet, and he's in a lot better situation than he was in the first couple of years, and it's Drake London. Yeah. And Drake London grades out as an elite route runner. Mm-hmm. He grades 77.3. He grades out as one of those mid wide receiver 1s in terms of route running. He could do it. What were the problems? 6.8 targets per game, which the targets per game were not a Drake London thing. That was a situational thing. That was a scheme thing. And the touchdowns per game, quarterback play, scheme. I will gladly blame both of those. Drake London, all you need to know is, does he have the talent as a route runner and as a wide receiver to be a wide receiver 1? And the answer is absolutely yes, he does. There is no question. There is absolutely no question.
No, I'm going to say this one thing about London, and I'm going to leave it at that. We are going from Arthur Smith, who is the most run-heavy play caller in the NFL, to Zach Robinson, who was the passing game coordinator for the LA Rams and is now calling plays on the offense for the Atlanta Falcons with Kirk Cousins throwing the ball. What do we think the Falcons are going to do? Literally everything that Arthur Smith did not do. Moving on. Tank Dell. I love seeing Tank Dell here because we've kind of gone back and forth with Tank Dell. We have a video coming out this week where we talk about him being, pretty admittedly touchdown dependent last year.
When it shows right here.
Right. And he has the highest, by far, the highest touchdown dependence here, right? It's 0.64 touchdowns per game. So the production, right, last year, a lot of the production last year was coming from those touchdowns. But also, his weighted success rate as a route runner was super duper impressive as a 3rd round rookie tied to CJ Stroud. You obviously have the questions of Diggs coming in. You obviously have the question of Nico Collins being in that offense and them all together taking away from each other. But at the end of the day, if you don't know who's going to be the top wide receiver there, which, spoiler, no one does, even if they act like they do, Tank Dell might be the best pick to take in fantasy this year because he's the cheapest guy. It's as simple as that. He's the cheapest guy.
That might be it. Now, with Tank Dell, there are a couple things here. Number one, of all the receivers on this list that grade out between these ranges, he has the lowest, or like the second lowest weighted success rate, so 75. So he would be the very, very bottom. And the lowest guy last year, lowest wide receiver 1 was Mike Evans at 75.17%. And the other thing is, his touchdowns per game is at 0.64. It's the highest of anybody on this list. And so I think he's one of the least likely on this list, outside of, some of the random outliers we'll get that are just elite route runners down here.
At price, he's still not bad.
But at price, you just don't know. You never know. So again, let's talk about Zay Flowers. I think Zay Flowers is a prime candidate to make a big jump this year. He's a guy that had a 79.75% weighted success rate last year. That's really, really freaking good. He was good at running routes last year against zone and man coverage. He got 6.75 targets per game and 0.3 touchdowns per game. Obviously, the touchdowns are going to have to go up, but touchdowns go up with targets. The targets are the main thing here. If Zay Flowers can get more volume, he could absolutely be a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 this year. But that's a big if. Will we see that go up? Will Rashad Bateman take some targets from him? Will Mark Andrews come in and take a significant amount of targets again from Lamar Jackson? We just don't know. But what we know is that he's a good route runner. He's a rookie. He's going to project to get better this year. And if he gets the right amount of targets, he's absolutely a candidate to do that. So Jaden Reed is another guy that's predictably a good route runner.
Yeah.
And
Wicks is on this list too, and
Both
Wicks is way down the line because he's got 3.87 targets per game. He obviously did not get a ton of opportunity last year in a really crowded wide receiver room. We expect that to go up a little bit this year with him as well. But with Jayden Reed, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to bet on anyone on that offense, bet on the one who outproduced everyone else the previous year. And is the slot wide receiver, so he has a higher floor than anyone else in that offense as well. So I think what you want to do here is, again, be conservative with the outlook of any of those receivers in Green Bay's offense, because the way they operate could be a lot of just like evenly spreading the ball around all of those players, because they do have very exclusive skill sets. Each one of them, they're not necessarily super duper versatile. Jayden Reed did show some ability to even have a little rushing upside in the red zone as well. They use him in jet sweeps in the red zone, and that's something that you want to account for in fantasy football. Don't overlook that. It really kind of happened under the radar last year. I think that's something that's going to translate into his second year in 2024. And again, rushing upside topped with the weighted success rate as a route runner, and again, half a touchdown per game. That's on the higher end. That's definitely on the higher end. You'd expect that to come back down, but you'd also expect him to get better with more experience in the NFL.
Yeah. All right, I'll wrap up with the three guys here that have a little bit less of a chance, but JSN's probably of these three guys, he has the best chance to be, make that jump into the high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 territory. 77% success rate last year, but he obviously was a wide receiver 5 because he only got 5.5 targets per game, which obviously is going to need to take a huge jump for him to do anything. And 0.24 touchdowns per game, which is you can build on that. You can build on that one. It's the targets. He needs to beat out Lockett. He needs to get more targets in Lockett. They're going to have more targets overall as an offense. They're going to probably be more pass heavy. And so with that being said, I think he is the top candidate out of these three guys, but I think he's not super likely to be a wide receiver 1 next year, even if he does make a big jump. Curtis Samuel made it on this list because he had a 78.02% weighted success rate. This one's intriguing, at least, because he's going to the Josh Allen offense with pretty much no dominant receiver there. With that being said, he would need to get 8 or 9 targets a game, and I don't necessarily see that. And Wicks is the same way. Wicks had the highest weighted success rate on here, and by far the lowest amount of targets per game, 3.87 targets per game. With Wicks, again, with the whole Green Bay wide receiver room, it's who's going to get the targets there. Where's the opportunity going to come from? If Wicks does get the targets, though, he has shown, based on his reception perception profile, that he is a pretty solid route runner, a pretty sound receiver. And I think Green Bay fans, this is what they've been arguing the whole time. But again, he's got to get the volume. And you've got 4 guys there. It makes it a mess to predict. And so, again, not all of these guys are going to be wide receiver 1s. Not all of these guys are going to make that jump and be a high-end wide receiver 2 or even be a wide receiver 1. All of these guys had the weighted success rate of a wide receiver 1, so it's worth looking at who can make the jump. Here's the official list of who could be a wide receiver 1 this year. Garrett Wilson could make the jump. Michael Pittman could be a wide receiver 1. It would probably take a little bit more external things like injuries for Michael Pittman to make that jump, but he's very safe, if anything. Chris Olave could make the jump. Calvin Ridley could make the jump. Jalen Waddle could make the jump. Drake London could make the jump.
Zay
Flowers could make the jump. Those are probably the guys right there. And again, this is a very good research on my Wes, so shout out to Wes for this research. But again, I think that when you're looking at metrics and numbers like this, it's hard to deny the talent of some of these players at the very least, guys like Josh Downs, Tavian Wicks, guys like that. But then again, just backing up the guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, taking those guys in the early rounds, I think is really smart to do. And I think this proves that they're pretty good picks at price, even if they're riskier. So do us a huge favor, drop a like on this video. Make sure you subscribe if you play fantasy football. And also head over to flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain. Any membership will get you our draft guide. It looks like this. It looks really good. So like I said, if you want access to this, code domain, any Mother Flocker cheer links in the description. Links also in the comments section. But we appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you later.